Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope all of you are having a very fine day today, wherever you are in the world. Today, I'd like to share with you some quick thoughts that I have about a very recent release this January 2020 from the one and only Criterion collection. The release is of the film Holiday. This film from 1938 is spine number 1009 in the Criterion collection. This makes it the first release from the Criterion collection of this year in January 2020. So in many respects it is a fairly significant release. It is also another film in the collection that is directed by George Cukor. It of course stars Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, two absolutely charming and marvelous performances that are both emotional, that have a great physicality to them. In particular, there's Cary Grant's wonderful physicality in this performance. There's also a tone of melancholy. There's also a tone of somewhat deep, nuanced complexity in the way in which it presents the different sides of the particular issue. And if I were to put it in very basic terms, the film, while set in a very lovely, charming sort of romantic comedy tone, is also a very interesting exploration about the issue as to what is better in one's life. This notion of a kind of independence and freedom on the one hand, or financial stability on the other. And I think the film, especially how it seems to deal with the subject matter, especially when compared to the earlier film from 1930, which I'll get to in a second, directed by Edward H. Griffith. This particular film here, the George Cukor film, I think presents that duality in a surprisingly nuanced way. It is not a purely black and white equation. I would suggest that it is a little bit more complex than that, although I think ultimately we are meant to side with the protagonists of the film, namely Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. And so I think therein lies the particular film's answer to that particular issue. Although, again, I would suggest that in the way in which it presents its characters and the way in which it presents in particular the characters of Julia Seton, and also the father, I think that there is room for a kind of sympathy towards their viewpoint, their worldview, as it were, which is very, in basic terms, this idea of financial stability over a kind of personal freedom, which then leads to the namesake of the film, Holiday, which is both an actual holiday that is being spoken of at many points of the film, but is also a kind of grand metaphor for this notion of freedom and independence. And so I think the film is quite refreshing in its somewhat subtle shades of nuance. So that, I think, makes the film quite an interesting exploration. I should say also that the way in which these subtle nuances emerge in this film are also through the way in which the actors create their performances respectively. And I find this to be a very a very great film that is filled with many great performances from different actors who have different roles to play. So it feels like a great ensemble work, but of course it also feels like it's headed with a wonderful assuredness and lovely lightness of touch by the two leads, Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. Undeniably a wonderful on-screen couple, and they have a charming chemistry and a mutual respect and admiration for each other that is undeniable. So to see them, and the way they are very bubbly and effervescent, their personalities just jump out from the screen, is quite lovely to behold. So these sorts of little details and moments of character development, and also just moments of characters being characters, I think really give this film great moments to shine and really show off all of its wonderful fireworks. So again, I'm trying to be as vague as possible because I don't want to spoil many of the surprises of this film if you haven't seen the film yet. But this is the film Holiday, and it's a great start to the new year, 2020, that's for sure. Now, let me now quickly go over the supplemental materials that are found here, as well as the special features in general. So this is labeled as being a new 4K digital restoration with uncompressed monaural soundtrack. I must admit that I don't know the past release history of this film in great detail, so I can't really make any comparative analytical comment here, but I can say that the picture looks quite good. It feels like a nice soft tone to the picture itself. The sound is very crisp and clear to my own ears, and I have no particular complaints in those departments. I rarely do from Criterion anyway. And then there is one of the best features here, which is the inclusion of the 1930 film Holiday, directed by Edward H. Griffith, as I mentioned. And I think the inclusion of this film is really wonderful because we can see the same source material being worked at in the story is pretty much the same, and the scenes are pretty much the same. The dialogue is pretty much the same. However, there are noticeable differences, both in terms of certain scenes that have been altered between versions. Also, of course, the performers are different, save for one particular exception to that, the Nick Potter character, right, Edward Everett Horton. And also we have, but apart from that, in general, the performers are, of course, different, and so they give different interpretations to these characters that we see in both films. And so it becomes like a very interesting thing to have a compare and contrast type of analytical approach when watching the 1930 version versus watching the 1938 version. And I think one can see that there are striking differences that are really really great. Plus, I think ultimately the films do approach the source material in a slightly different tone. I would say that the earlier film, while it is still not bereft of any sort of lightness, that's for sure, it seems to handle the subject matter in a slightly more subdued way. I wouldn't necessarily call that a negative trait, but I would say that it does approach the matter in a more subdued way, and also the visual style does seem to be a little bit more of a theatrical presentation of the source material. Again, that's no knock on the film, I don't think. That is not in any way a negative trait. I think it presents the subject matter quite clearly and in many ways quite effectively. But then, of course, we have the later film, the Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn vehicle, and I think we can see that the approach is different. I think in no small part due to the fact that it's down to the way in which the actors approach these roles, and we can really see the sort of dynamism that Grant and Hepburn and others really brought to the table when they came together to make this film Holiday in 1938. And so, but I should say also that the inclusion of the 1930 film here, while providing a compare-contrast opportunity, comparative analysis, is also in and of itself a worthy film to have, to include in the Criterion collection, and it's wonderful to have it. So you're getting two options here with the 1930 film. You're either getting a film that you can enjoy on its own merits, and or you can use the film and watch the 1938 film and enjoy an exercise of comparison between the two works, and see which points of difference you prefer over the other version, and that sort of thing. It's a very interesting exercise indeed, but that is probably the main feature of the special features of this particular Blu-ray or this particular Criterion release. And then we have a new conversation between filmmaker and distributor Michael Schlesinger and film critic Michael Sragow. And these are two gentlemen that are in a room talking about aspects of this film Holiday. In particular, they're talking about the performances, the background, also making comparisons to the 1930 film by Edward H. Griffith. They're also making comparisons to the Philadelphia story. They're also making comparisons to Howard Hawks' work, Bringing Up Baby. They also then talk about the merits of the film itself. And so it's a nice conversation. It's about about 30 minutes, I think, and it's filled with a lot of wonderful, wonderful information, really fantastic information. And they are both very knowledgeable, and I think they work off of each other quite well in a very lively conversation that goes from point to point to point in a very smooth manner. So I'm very much a fan of this conversation. If I had to make a gentle suggestion to any viewer out there who is as of yet not yet immersed in these supplemental features, my suggestion is probably when you've finished watching the film, if you're going to go into the supplements, then I would suggest starting with the 1930 version of the film first. And then after you've seen both versions, you can go into this filmed conversation between Michael Schlesinger and Michael Sragow. The reason I say that is because they go into their own analytical viewpoints and opinions about which version is superior in what capacity and that sort of thing. It's a very worthy conversation, but it's probably more effective if one watches the films first, to give one the opportunity to make up one's own mind first, and then after one has made up one's own mind about which version is superior or what parts of the differences one prefers over which, etc., then you can go to this conversation and you can enjoy what they have to say, and then you can agree or disagree with what they're saying. And so it's that sort of dialogue that you can further elaborate upon when you're watching the supplements here. So that's my gentle suggestion as for the order in which one can watch these supplements. But you don't have to take my word for it, and you can watch the supplements in whatever order you wish, of course. But again, just a gentle suggestion. Also, I should point out, just a very minor footnote, that a very curious footnote. You know, I'm always quite keen on trying to get the pronunciations of names of filmmakers as accurate as possible. And so my understanding has always been that the way in which one pronounces the director's name is George Cukor. However, it's a very interesting thing that the conversation between Michael Schlesinger and Michael Sragow, I think they refer to him as George Cukor, or Cukor, instead of Cukor. So that's a very interesting thing. So I don't know I actually don't know what way to pronounce the name is correct. All throughout my life, I've encountered the name George Cukor pronounced as such, and so that's how I've grown to know how to pronounce his name in documentaries and interviews, and also academic studies, film studies classes, and the like. It's always been pronounced George Cukor, but it's interesting to see these two gentlemen here pronounce it. I think it's Cukor. That's how they say it. So that's very interesting. And if anyone knows the correct answer, please let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what the exact proper way to pronounce the director's name is. For the time being, though, I will stick with George Cukor. Then there is an audio excerpted interview from the AFI oral history with director George Cukor, recorded in 1970 and 1971. So this is really great stuff from the director himself about certain aspects of the film and his filmography. It's wonderful to hear, and I love how eloquent George Cukor is when he's speaking about film and cinema. So this is a very welcome supplement. It's a really great one. Then there is a costume gallery, which was a sort of a picture gallery. It's one of these things where you push the forward button and you can get text, some slides. It's like a slideshow, and you just a manual slideshow, and you can just push the forward button or the backwards button, depending on if you want to go back and forth, and get pictures that are in slide form, and then get some informative text along the way in between. So this is very neat. This is something that the costumes, I think, are, while not necessarily the most elaborately ornate costumes in the world, I would say also that it is a film that has a plethora of very charming costumes, and so fashion design costumes, and especially from the times as well. And in particular, we're talking about the fashion, for instance, of the Katharine Hepburn character. So this is a very welcome supplement from the Criterion collection. I know that slideshows aren't necessarily for everyone, so if that's not your cup of tea, then that's okay, I suppose. Although I should say that it's not so long, so it's not completely unbearable if, again, slideshows aren't your cup of tea, so you can go through it. And the pictures are actually quite informative in many respects, especially for someone like myself who isn't necessarily an expert in cinema fashion. So, and then there is a critic. There's not a critic. There is an essay by the critic Dana Stevens in the liner notes here, which is called "Playmates," and this is a very sharp, well-written essay, and this has a lovely way in which it talks about the film itself, and also it seems to be making nice comparisons to the Philadelphia story, which I think is the very obvious comparison to make in terms of a cinema or critical viewpoint of Grant, Hepburn, Cukor, etc. So I like the essay for its sort of balance in that, and it also never loses sight of the fact that it is still focusing in on the main subject here, which is the film Holiday. So I find this essay to be quite good indeed, and so you should check it out if you have the opportunity. I think you can find it online. Once again, it's called Playmates by Dana Stevens. So I should say also that while the supplements, I think, are very solid, and each has its own great points of merit, I must say that I would have loved to have seen an audio commentary track included with this film. I think it would have been so great, and I think we had that conversation at the very least between Michael Schlesinger and Michael Sragow, and so I think either one or both of those gentlemen could have provided a really nice audio commentary track that could have been an even better, or not even better, but it could have made the release of this film by the Criterion Collection even more noteworthy. I'm always a big fan of audio commentary tracks. I haven't, for the most part anyway, Criterion's commentary tracks have been very stellar, so it would have been nice to see one for this film as well, but oh well, c'est la vie. That's how the cookie crumbles sometimes, so we can't have everything that we want. But still, commentary tracks are always welcome, so if ever there's the opportunity, then I would sincerely hope that commentary tracks would become part of as many releases as possible. So there's that. And also I should say that the overall presentation is really nice. I note, of course, the cover art here, and then we have the continuation of this kind of motif throughout here, this blue and yellow and orange motif. If we open it up here, but we go to the back, we see that carried through in a very consistent artistic fashion. So I'm quite I'm as always, I'm quite impressed with this. The art directors are credited as being Sarah Habibi and Eric Skillman, and designer Eric Skillman. So again, this is another solid presentation. Is it the greatest presentation from Criterion ever? I don't know. The jury is still out on that, I suppose. But and as I say, while the supplements themselves are solid, I think an audio commentary track would have really put this over the top for me. Still, I cannot complain at all, given what we've got here, which is of high quality and a great caliber, as always from Criterion. And the film itself, as I said before, is one that's really worth watching for the kind of straightforward romantic comedy aspects of the film that make it very entertaining on the one hand, but then also the kinds of subtle nuances that it surprisingly provides that makes for a film that is, I think, very, very much above average and of high quality. So this is the film Holiday. So, my friends, that's it for now. And I must ask you, what do you think of this film? Do you have this? Have you gotten this Blu-ray or DVD, whatever the case may be, from the Criterion Collection yet? If so, what are your thoughts? Are you satisfied with the release? Are you still unsure, etc.? Whatever the case may be, my friends, please feel free to let me know in the comments section below. I would love to hear what it is you have to say. So, okay, thank you very much for joining me. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, thank you again, and cheers.